Good evening. I'm very honored to be here and have the great fortune of moderating this panel after we saw such a really a film that's calling us to action to really think about the children within our community. And so I'm honored to be here with this wonderful panel, and I'd like to let you know who's here, although I'm sure you see some familiar faces. You've already met Renee and got to hear some wonderful words from her. Also on our panel this evening is Mayor Sly James, who is the two-term Kansas City mayor. And he is definitely, and I've seen it in action, a staunch advocate for children, education, and decreasing the achievement gap. So thank you, Mayor James, for being here this evening. Also with us is Tyler Nottberg. He is the chairman and CEO of U.S. Engineering Company, representing the business community. He's a founder of Aligned, a nonprofit, nonpartisan coalition of business leaders committed to improving education in Kansas and Missouri. Aligned is also a sponsor of this evening's event, so thank you for being here. Thank you for your sponsorship. And rounding out our panel this evening is a wonderful colleague of mine, Paula Neth. Paula oversees the direction of programs and services, including the supervision of program directors, innovation, systems development, budgeting, and planning at the Family Conservancy. She is passionate and committed to advocate and building strong systems for all families and their young children. And she has over 20 years of experience in child care, resource, and referral at both the state and the local level. So thank you also, Paula, for being here. So welcome, panelists, and as the film said, beginnings matter. So, you know, this beginning of our discussion also matters. We heard in the film that 10% of our programs in the nation are considered high quality. We also know that in Kansas City, Missouri, and in our Kansas City region, we are lacking for what we would consider high quality or even measures of quality. So let's get started by just having a conversation about why does quality matter, and in particular, high quality. Why is it important? And we'll start with Paula.
Thank you, Giovanna, and welcome everyone. And before I start, I just want to say, are there any teachers or early educators in the audience tonight? Can you guys please stand? Let's give these folks a round of applause. Thank you all for what you do every day. You guys are the brain builders, the brain engineers, and really are making an impact in our community. So when we think about quality, I think based on the video tonight, I hope you all really could hear the message that those interactions and relationships are the most critical part of a quality program. So what those interactions are happening in that classroom and those relationships children are building with their teachers in that classroom are so critical. So what we've done in the Kansas City area and at the Family Conservancy is we have really focused on how can we support teacher-child interactions in the classroom, and we're doing that through using the classroom assessment and scoring system. And what we have found with that tool is it really helps teachers understand their role in the classroom, the importance of social and emotional development, and how they can support children in their classroom, and learning how to handle those big emotions that they feel. We also know that it helps with thinking about how their classroom is organized and managed, and then how they can really help children scaffold their learning. So for me, those teacher-child interactions are the most critical part of quality in our community. And so we are doing that through the classroom assessment and scoring system. In the state of Missouri, we do not have currently a quality rating system. And so we have developed an early learning program profile. And at the heart of the early learning program profile is the class assessment, so that we will be using that to really help understand how we can support teachers in that important part of a program, and also then how do we invest quality dollars to make sure that we have the resources to help them in improving.
Yes, and I think Paul is hitting on one of the key points that comes out, not only in the work we do, and those of you that are in the classroom or supporting classrooms, but also that is hit in the film, that interactions matter. Whether it's with the teacher or the family or the person that you see at the grocery store, it's those relationships that I always say, interactions is where the magic happens. It doesn't matter where you are, it matters what you're doing and what you're saying. And so I think that is a really important piece for us to remember as we're thinking about quality. And the families pointed that out as well. You know, I could tell that something was off, I think one of the moms says, about the interactions, or I knew that learning was happening. She could see it. So quality isn't just a thing that we talk about, it's actually something that can be seen. Right. So what are some other thoughts you might bring to us, Renee, about quality and why it matters?
So we have strong research evidence that high quality early child care and preschool not only improves your life chances, your likelihood of graduating and going on to higher education, but it improves your health outcomes. Your risk for chronic illnesses, the major causes of morbidity and mortality. We also know, and as was shared, that toxic stressors, chronic, unrelenting stressors that are inadequately buffered by supportive resources and caregivers within your environment have a very high toll on your health and your development as well. So high quality childcare meets both of those needs. It meets your need for an enriched environment that can be responsive, so the signals a child sends out into the world are responded to, and the child is brought into engagement. This is brain building activities, and it simply cannot take place effectively in overcrowded environments where support staff and caregivers are simply overwhelmed by the number of children that they're caring for, or do not receive adequate professional development to understand things like toxic stress, things like how trauma impacts child behavior and readiness to learn and social emotional regulation. So high quality classroom is able to help buffer stressors and toxic stressors, as well as support optimal brain development. So this is critically important. And although, you know, I'm supposed to be talking in the scientific way, I mean, how many, you saw each parent with how difficult the decision was to trust another group of people to help take care of their children. And I think as a society, we just have to extend ourselves a little bit more to really walk in the shoes of parents and children and understand that in order for them to kind of show up and be present and engage in these work-related roles, we have to show up for them. And one of the ways we as a society can show up for them is making sure that there is affordable, high-quality early child care and education.
Thank you. And I think that is something that a lot of our communities are talking about, is not only affordable but also accessible, and being able to be there as well. And I think you also bring up the point of quality is not just about the interactions that are happening, but also how are we supporting those teachers, and how are we helping to support them when they do have children that are coming to them that are having these cumulative effects of trauma, and how to best to buffer them. So I think those aspects are important for us to consider when it comes to quality. And so one of the key pieces that jumped out to me, one of the commentators on the film says, this isn't the way it's supposed to be. They talked about, you know, the opportunity gap. And I always point to, for myself, there's been one piece that has changed my thinking about the world. It's the book Our Kids by Robert Putnam. And I think this No Small Matters really jumps onto that same side to talk about the barriers of what's happening for families to be able to access high quality care. So we're going to turn it over to Mayor James and ask you, what are some of the most common barriers that you've seen that are preventing Kansas City families from accessing child care and high quality care?
I think as I look out here, I can see one. There's a lot of really good people here, but there's room for a lot more, and they're not here. So I think a lack of understanding and education about the issue is one of those barriers. I also think, to be honest with you, that the education industry, as we know it, isn't really geared for that. Everything seems to be geared towards a couple of things, K through 12 and STEM. If you're not into STEM, then you're probably a second-class student. We tend to channel kids in a way that is not really necessarily in their best interest. But I'd say the main thing that is the biggest barrier is a lack of understanding about the return on the investment. Why people who don't have kids ought to be willing to be responsible to make sure that the children of this city, or any city, or of this country, have the things that they need to turn into the citizens that we want them to be, and that they deserve the opportunity to be. We have our priorities all, I like to say, bass-ackwards. We tend to get focused on things that don't necessarily get the job done when it comes to taking care of our children. And then there's just basically some people trapped in poverty. Their hierarchy of needs is simply survival. They're just trying to get by day to day, making sure that they have food the next day, a place to sleep at night. And they're doing the best they can, but they don't have the resources and they don't have the energy to get out of the circumstances that they're in without somebody coming to their rescue. There's all sorts of barriers, but the main barrier is that we tend to focus on the wrong things when it comes to long-term investments in people. If we focused on long-term investments in people, like we focus on long-term investments in stocks or in buildings or in transportation or any of the other things that are necessary for society, I think we'd have a different outcome.
Thank you. What do you think, Paula?
What else can I say? I mean, I think you've outlined a lot of the big issues. I think what we see is we're trying to help families in our community access childcare. The number one barrier for them is the cost. And I think that for an infant, it could be up to $20,000 a year. And for a lot of families, that's more than their mortgage. And so I think that we have families that are having to make really hard decisions. And I think a lot of times the women may suffer because she's the one that has to stay home because the husband may make more money. And so women are having to make really tough choices. And I think that we need to figure out how we can help support families in thinking about how they can afford quality childcare.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of those issues were pointed out in the film around those tough decisions and seeing those families in that decision-making moment of what do I do?
Right.
How can I afford this? I'm going to need to leave my job.
I think another thing we don't talk enough about too is that there's this huge need for non-traditional hour care. We have a lot of families who don't work traditional hours and they're really stuck then trying to figure out how do they piecemeal care together. And as we saw in the movie, a lot of families depend on families, friends, and neighbors. And so how do we support families that are working in those non-traditional hours?
And I think that when we think about how do we support families because they're wanting to go to work, it moves us right into thinking about the workforce. And I think then we'll turn to you, Tyler, and just ask you the question, why is it important for the workforce to have access to high quality care? Why is this issue important to the business community?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me here. I think it's pretty obvious why the workforce needs high-quality individuals to show up at the door eventually to do work, whether it's a U.S. engineering company or any of the other great companies that are here in Kansas City. And for many years, I feel like businesses simply expected that the school system, whether it's public, private, parochial, whatever it is, were going to produce a product that we could just allow to show up, and then we would have our selection of who was going to work for us. Well, I think we've proven over time now that the lack of engagement by the business community in education issues, education reform issues, and for me personally, I'm very passionate about early childhood education, specifically the lack of engagement in early childhood education has in part led to this situation. And so now is absolutely the time, if we are thinking about, in our case, U.S. engineering is 125 years old, if we want to get to 250 years, we need to start planning now. And this is a strategic issue that doesn't involve just Mayor James, it doesn't involve just Paula, it doesn't just involve Renee's research or Giovanna and all of the great work that you and Dean and everyone at the Family Conservancy is doing. It involves a team effort. And so when a team effort is required, I think that's something that the business community can do a lot of good at engaging in, bringing together these constituencies, whether it's the adults that are in the system, to talk about what the politicians are doing in the system, to talk about what the businesses are doing in the system. And I think unless we move forward in a way that actively engages the business community, we're going to just continue to end up in this cycle where we're sitting back and, you know, taking pot shots at the school system not functioning correctly, but not doing anything about it.
Like there's some agreement about that, about actively engaging, and I think that No Small Matter tried to point out that the fact around the executive functioning skills, that you need individuals that can actually interact with other individuals in the workplace.
That's exactly right. No one that shows up at the door at U.S. Engineering am I going to ask whether they know all the state capitals. But I am going to ask them if they know how to work well with people. I am going to ask them what kinds of problems they like to solve. I am going to ask them to be creative in addressing problems, complex problems for customers. And those kinds of skills and the social emotional learning that clearly all of the science is pointing to gets set and established through these neural networks and patterns early on, those are the things ultimately that we end up having to deal with as real benefits for high-performing individuals at U.S. Engineering, and the individuals who don't work out generally aren't able to exhibit those skills.
Right. And I think that all of those skills we saw displayed in this video and in the classrooms that you're in every day, and those children giving the opportunity to solve problems and what they can think of as they're moving that through. Mayor James, do you have any thoughts around the question of why should business leaders be concerned about early learning?
You really want to wind me up? Before I get into that, I do want to say this. I want to thank you, Giovanna, and Tyler, and Paula. Paula and I are almost traveling roadshow anymore, for everything that you've done to help us with pre-K. The need for us to invest in our children is not only obvious, it is paramount. Turn to Page KC is dedicated to third grade reading proficiency. And it becomes quite clear quite early that not all kids are similarly situated with regards to reading, and one of the reasons is that they're not kindergarten ready, and one of the reasons that they're not kindergarten ready is the lack of the ability to access and or afford quality pre-K in order to offset that 30 million word gap at 3. If we are going to have the city and the state and the country that we need, we must make the investment in the stock of the city, the state, and the country, and that stock is in children. We cannot build a future if we do not have the resources that are necessary to do it. Tyler is an enlightened individual in the business community because he does get it. And I don't want to say that he's the only one because that's not true, but he is one of a increasing number, I'll say, of people who get it. Workforce is absolutely vital. I'm a member of the post-war generation, World War II, and we're going to be the top of the mushroom, and the kids that we have coming up now are going to be that stalk, and the top of the mushroom is going to be bigger than the stalk, and if the stalk isn't strong enough to hold up the top, then we're all going to topple. It is vital to this city for us to get this done. I am not going to let anybody out of here without telling you that April 2nd, there is an issue on the ballot to finance early childhood quality, early childhood education in this city. And although it has met with some resistance from unlikely sources, it is not because we aren't trying. We have to get this done. If we don't get it done now, it's going to be years before we get it. And we'll continue to lose more and more children, generation after generation, until we get it right. And all of those children, some of those children are the ones that people call me about every day and say, what are you doing about homicides? What are you doing about poverty? What we need to do about homicides and poverty is make sure that our children have options so that they don't have to be engaged in negative problem solving, and so that they have the skills to get out and break the cycle of poverty. And if we don't do that for them, we're only hurting ourselves.
I hear some agreement again from the crowd on that. So thinking about what other communities are doing, I think, Renee, you're sort of an outsider looking in and maybe can give us a different perspective as we're thinking about this. What are other communities doing around early learning that we could maybe as a community really glean from and put into action here?
Well, I don't think any community is perfect, and I think we all have room to grow. But universal preschool programs, funding more slots and more seats, making sure every child has the opportunity to experience high quality education, that every family has the opportunity to access affordable early child care. We have smart, effective social programs and early learning tools that simply every child does not have access to. So there's a fundamental question as to why. Why would it be that we have evidence-based, effective social programs and educational processes that every child does not have the opportunity and every family doesn't have the choice to engage in? So that's just one simple thing. But I think I'm going to say something that I don't exactly have evidence of, but I think it will ring true with folks. I don't think this can be solved by doing this partially. Casey is going to have to be all in, or we're not gonna achieve. This is an urgent public health problem that affects our criminal justice, affects our safety, affects our productivity. We are doing things over time and we are slipping further and further behind as a nation in comparison to other countries around the world in terms of how our children are doing and the degree to which they are succeeding. We are going to have to go all in with the long game, with a choice to invest in every child. And that's going to be a change in our orientation. As long as we continue with philosophy around excusing ourselves from seeing this as a shared responsibility. Is early childhood a shared responsibility? We're going to have to make a decision about that.
And I think it puts us a lot of times in the same conversation that was happening around high school when they were extending into high school. Is that a shared responsibility? It's sort of that same question. Go ahead, Tyler.
I'd say it's the pre-K tax specifically is more evidence of what our community has the potential to do. And we've proven, especially over the last 10 or 15 years, and certainly under Mayor James's leadership, that our community is capable of bold economic initiatives. I mean, you just look around the city and you see where we are today compared to where we were, but there are a lot of people who are getting left behind. And this pre-K tax is the next big, bold economic initiative. So I have a lot of confidence that we are capable of not only approving this, but then implementing it, which is, of course, the most important aspect of that. And there are a lot of individuals who are interested in getting engaged that way. You know, I think it's very easy to build coalitions of no this day and age. It's a lot more difficult to build coalitions of yes. And I think slowly and gradually, a coalition of yes is being built around this. And I think that Mayor James is absolutely correct. If we say no one more time, even if the people who say no think that they won a victory, it's a little bit like eating a dinner mint. You know, it may taste good for a little while, but ultimately it's very unsatisfying. And we cannot let what is not perfect get in the way of what's absolutely necessary right now as a first step.
Any other thoughts, Paula, around what we could
Yeah, I'm just going to take it a little different direction. I think that, I was reminded during the movie about the military childcare model. And so I often wonder, we know how to do this as a country, and we saw a need and we did it, and we made it a priority. And so I think that it's going to be really important for us to really be pushing at the federal level to say, why can't we do this? We've done it, we know how to do it, why can't we do it for all children?
I agree with Paula. I think we do need to push it at the federal level, but I'll tell you something. I'm not willing to wait for them to figure out where they're going to lunch. They can't seem to figure out what day it is in D.C., and the state's not much better. If we want to do it, the best way to do it is to start right here at home. And that's exactly why you're here, and that's exactly why April 2nd is so important. We can't wait for other people to save us. We have to save ourselves, and then we have to turn in the lifeguards and go jump in and save others. But right now, we have to save the children of this city today, not 10 years from now, not 15 years from now when somebody finally figures it out or comes up with some new funding stream. We have to do this now.
Absolutely, and I think even some of our national organizations have really taken on to that idea of what cities can do and what communities can do. So the National League of Cities having their Early Learning Nation and really supporting building the workforce, those kinds of initiatives have been helpful in amplifying some of the conversation that's being had. So you all have brought up a lot of things. We saw a lot of great information that help us to think about when it comes to the small matters. So what are your words of advice and thoughts for how every person here can speak on behalf of children in our community? And I have a good sense of what one of our panelists will share, but if others, what are your thoughts? And what can you do, whether it's today or long-term as well?
I would just encourage everyone to go and talk about this about everybody that you know, and make sure that they understand what you just witnessed tonight and your new understanding of how critical this issue is, and tell people to get involved and to, should I say it, ma'am?
Absolutely.
Vote on April 2nd.
I'd say one of the amazing things about this city is how many initiatives and organizations are engaged not only in this issue, but in issues around education reform, workforce development, scholarships. All kinds of things are going on in this city. It'll make your head spin. It's very difficult to know what everyone is doing all of the time. And one of the great things about Kansas City is we're a super philanthropic city, but one of the difficult things about dealing with Kansas City is that we're super philanthropic, so we all give to a bunch of little causes. Go online, find out. The Family Conservancy is awesome. It's not the only place where a lot of this work is being done, And so it takes one quick look on the Google machine to find out, who else is doing great work in and around Kansas City, Wyandotte County, Blue Springs, Lee Summit, Olathe, Lenexa, go to all of these different places, because sharing the ideas is just as important as coming up with your own.
Yesterday we started at 8:30 and we went to 5 early childhood centers. I spent a couple hours on the phone raising money, had a forum with Paula last night at one of the childhood centers to show you that learning is a lifelong journey. One of the directors there reminded me of what team actually means. It means together, everyone achieves more. We are here together. I need you to be ambassadors. First, I need you to vote, but I also need you to grab your next door neighbor, have them grab their next door neighbor, and everybody vote, because this is our opportunity to actually make that difference. It won't come again. We cannot miss it. So I need you to get out there and vote and support kids. It's great to be at the movie, but now it's time to turn into action. I would also predict that if we can get this passed on April 2nd and put the system in place that's already well described in a great program that I see Dr. Holland out there, my education advisor, who worked her tail off with others to put this together, Giovanna being one and others as well. One thing that I think will happen when we get this in place and we're moving is that we will be able to align things so that we are not wasting energy going off in 15 different directions, but that we can then align our energies in one direction. And we can do exactly what Jeffrey Canada did in the Harlem Children's Zone. He went into hospitals and started talking to pregnant families. And he started talking with them before the child was born so that they knew what was coming. We can do that here. We can actually positively get into our hospitals and start preparing parents for what's coming so that we don't have to go back and backtrack, because a child is learning in that first day, first second of life, but the parents need to be ready to start teaching in that first second of life. And they themselves have to be taught about what that first second of life means, not only for the child, but for themselves. We can do this, but the only way that we're gonna get it done is by working together and recognizing that if we do not take care of our children, there will be no one to take care of us.
I believe many people in this room believe there's some truth to the statement, it takes a village to raise a child. We also know that it takes a village to neglect and fail to protect a child. If you think about lead in the water. So here's the thing. Here's the thing. With this particular issue, each of you is so powerful because this is an issue that will be won by neighbors speaking to neighbors, table to table, friend to friend. If each person in this room talked to 8 people, just had a conversation about no small matter, and those 8 people talked to 8 other people, that's the kind of change that's going to really allow this city to be the demonstration for the nation of what happens when a city decides we want to see something different for children and parents. So I see early childhood education as fluoride in the water. It is something you put in that protects everybody, has a benefit for everybody. It nourishes and develops the brains of children. For those who've already have a lot, they get more. For those who may be lacking, they get what they need. But it's a part of us working side by side, shoulder to shoulder. You know, we have all of this evidence that shows that this is the right thing to do, but we're failing to do it. Future generations will look back at us, our grandchildren, great-grandchildren, will ask what we did in this moment with everything that we knew and why we didn't do more. So here's an opportunity to do something bold, to make a real statement, to try and really bend the curve.
Great, and I think all of you bring up this idea that while each of us are powerful, we have that power when we come together, when we share ideas, when we collaborate as we innovate, rather than innovate and then offer to collaborate, where we share that innovation, we become even more powerful. And I think it's exciting to be in a community that's really thinking about this issue. And you know, I've always heard the statement, it didn't originate from Oprah, but that's why I heard it. When you know better, you do better. We've seen no small matter, we know better. And now we have to think about, as a group, how do we do better? And so I give you that thought as you're moving forward as well. That's really the time that we have this evening. I appreciate all of our panelists for being here, for sharing the information that you have from all the different perspectives as well.